March 3, 1943. Deep within occupied Poland at Oklag 24B, Schubin, a profound desperation brewed. But with it, an ingenuity that would challenge the perceived security of the Nazi regime. This was no ordinary prison camp. Here, a deep-seated aversion to captivity fueled an organized resistance. The X-Organization, a sophisticated escape committee formed by Allied prisoners, it transformed individual, often haphazard attempts into systematic, coordinated efforts. At its heart, a colossal undertaking, the Asselin Tunnel, named for its originator, a young Canadian POW, Eddie Asselin. His daring idea, to tunnel from the communal latrine. An unconventional, even repulsive, starting point. This revolting stink of human waste became an unlikely asset. It repelled German guards, masking the initial sounds and smells of a covert operation. The prisoners were weaponizing their environment. At the entrance known as the abort, Bill Ash, a driven, compulsive escaper from Dallas, Texas, began his initial descent. This was a pivot point, from small bids to ambitious, large-scale plans. The tunnel's dimensions were grimly precise, 2 feet 6 inches high. The same across, a coffin-sized passage dictated by the length of bedboards used for shoring. It would sink 17 feet below ground, designed to avoid seismic detectors. Air pipes, ingeniously fashioned from Red Cross clim cans, snaked through the earth, while primitive light came from a bootlace wick floating in margarine in a sardine tin. Beyond the diggers, a specialized infrastructure flourished. Geeves, the POW tailors crafted civilian clothes. Cook's tours created meticulous escape maps and forged identity papers. Lions prepared high-energy escape food, known simply as the mixture. The network extended even beyond the wire. Józef Brykes, a Czech RAF pilot, cultivated relationships with local Polish civilians. Stefania Maludzinska, a Polish teenager working in a produce store, risked execution to smuggle Nazi forms and procure a camera and film. Alfons Jakalski and Henryk Salczynski further risked their lives, developing film for crucial escape documents. For decades, the popular image of POW camps was one of impenetrable fortresses. But the meticulous, multifaceted efforts from within Schubin subtly debunk this notion. They underscore the vulnerabilities in the POW system, showing how sheer will and ingenuity could undermine perceived security. The Great Escape was not the sole model. Organized resistance was pervasive. The arrival of United States Army Air Force prisoners in October of the previous year had swelled the ranks, adding fresh urgency to escape efforts. At the Oflag Tex 1B compound, Wing Commander Harry Wingsday, the senior British officer, carried the experience of a previous successful tunnel escape from Dulag Luft. His presence reinforced the viability of such cunning operations. Just before Christmas, Sergeant Philip Waring, an English Spitfire pilot, proved escape was possible. He simply stole a bicycle, stowed away on a delivery truck, and vanished. His breakout, however brief, was a pivotal moment, showing that even tightened security could be circumvented. The German response was swift. Security measures intensified. Unescorted outings for orderlies which had allowed Waring's escape were terminated. The game had changed, forcing the X-Organization to embrace complex methods. Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Buckley, known as Big X, chaired the escape planning meetings. The decision was made to proceed with the Asselin Tunnel. There was a critical urgency, the impending transfer of all British and American Air Force personnel to Stalag Luft 3, Sagan. This was their window. The escape, scheduled for March 5th, was meticulously coordinated. A rugby match involving 30 players and officials was organized for the late afternoon, creating a significant diversion to overwhelm German surveillance. Colonel Charles Rojo Goodrich, the senior American officer, ensured American airmen would play their part in this chaos. As the day progressed, digging shifts continued. At 3 p.m., engineering shifts began, with stooges and lookouts warning of approaching goons from the goon boxes and towers. By 4:30 p.m., the final shift members emerged from the tunnel, ready for the 5 p.m. appel, the camp headcount. Under cover of this distraction, Joe Bricks and a partner named Morris enacted their own coordinated diversion, escaping via the Honey Wagon Dash, a horse-drawn sewage removal vehicle. Meanwhile, the tunnel reached its climax. Eddie Asselin, who had conceived the plan, broke through to the surface. The culminating moment of months of digging, 33 men were poised for freedom. The escape was designed to coincide with camp lockup at 9 p.m. The sheer scale of the operation was ambitious. Beyond the 33 tunnel escapers, 10 ghost escapees were hiding in the White House attic, inflating the numbers, adding to the German confusion. At dawn the next day, Saturday, Don Gehrig discovered the undetected breakout. It was a moment of serendipity, providing him an unexpected chance at freedom. But the German security machine, though initially circumvented, was methodical. At the morning appel, Hauptmann Sims, the Wehrmacht's security officer, observed 46 prisoners unaccounted for. The alarm was immediate. MP-40 submachine guns, Schmeissers, were levelled at the remaining POWs. A vast search was launched. 36 Allied POWs were loose in Poland, with a 9 to 12-hour head start. Among them, Bill Ash and Eddie Asselin, who remained on the run for 6 days. Wings Day and his partner Dudley Craig lasted barely 36 hours before being betrayed. In little more than a week, 33 escapees were recaptured. The human cost was evident. Big X, Jimmy Buckley and Jorgen Tolbitzer were never seen again, their fate after a Baltic Sea escape attempt tragically unresolved. Otakar, Otto Cerny, and Stanislaw Danny Kroll, whose pre-war skills aided their escape, faced prolonged imprisonment. Kroll, in fact, would later become a cinematic inspiration. This high recapture rate subtly debunks the myth of effortless escape. Even successful breakouts were fraught with peril, reliant on immense luck, and often resulted in renewed captivity. The events at Schubin, though less famous, were not isolated. They built upon years of failed and partially successful attempts, laying the groundwork for future endeavours. The 1943 Asselin escape, alongside the later Wooden Horse escape, demonstrated the potential of large-scale organised efforts. These were crucial precedents for what would become the Great Escape at Stalag Luft 3, Sagan. In late March, the majority of RAF and USAAF prisoners, some 800 men, including most of the Schubin escapees, were transferred to Stalag Luft 3. For the remaining prisoners, the consequences were profound. The cat-and-mouse game with their captors continued, shaping their resilience and their very will to fight. The abandoned Oflag X Porten-B was soon renamed Oflag 64. In the summer of June 9, 1943, the first U.S. Army officer POWs arrived, a new phase of captivity beginning. By October, some 224 officer POWs and 21 American enlisted men were housed at Schubin. Colonel Thomas D. Dorr of Schubin. Drake became the senior American officer, or SOO. He was tasked with ensuring the American airmen established a new order. Among the new arrivals was Craig D. Campbell, General Eisenhower's former aide, who, unbeknownst to his captors, concealed his true identity. He was a high-value prisoner, captured during Erwin Rommel's surprise attack in Tunisia. Also present were Second Lieutenants H. Randolph Holder and George Durgin, captured in February during the intense battles in Tunisia. Colonel Drake, a disciplined and pragmatic leader, established a strict camp structure. Discipline was enforced and morale maintained through organized sports and a focus on neatness. He quickly set up a secret escape committee led by Lieutenant Colonel James Alger, known to the prisoners as Gentleman Jim. Alger, the S2 or intelligence and security officer, vetted new arrivals and oversaw all escape plans. The committee proved highly effective. It brought American ingenuity and entrepreneurial spirit to the challenge of escape. In September, the digging began on a White House tunnel. This was a different approach from the British, who often prioritized a single, massive tunnel project. The Americans, however, were more independent, more varied in their approach to escape. A critical internal communication network emerged. The Bird, an ingeniously built radio receiver, provided uncensored BBC war news, a vital counter to German propaganda. In October, Lieutenant Colonel John H. Jack Van Vliet Jr., a serial escape artist, launched a daring wire-cutting attempt using cutters acquired through the bribery of a Polish workman. It ended in failure and harsh punishment, but reinforced the prisoner's determination. The arrival of Major General John R. Dean in Moscow on October 18, 1943, signaled a new era of potential American-Soviet military cooperation. His mission, crucial for future POW repatriation, would indirectly impact the fate of those at Oflag 64. But it was in November, with the first snows of Schubin, that something truly unique took root. Lieutenant J. Frank Diggs, a former journalist for the Washington Post, conceived and edited the OFLAG 64 item, a camp newsletter. Pulitzer Prize-winning AP war correspondent Larry Allen contributed an op-ed column under the pseudonym Schubin Bureau of the AP. Later, Wright Bryan, a war correspondent for the Atlanta Journal and NBC, also wounded and captured, would join the team. The production of the item was a remarkable instance of pragmatic civilian-military interactions. Willy Crix, a German guard and printer, oversaw the print shop that produced the newsletter. His wife, Annie Crix, a dedicated Nazi, would greet the American POWs delivering print materials with a resolute Heil Hitler. This complex dynamic underscores that the enemy was not monolithic. This American approach to prisoner management at OFLAG 64 created a unique environment where cooperation with guards, however limited, was possible. Colonel Drake's pragmatic leadership secured concessions, including the newsletter and even radio programs on the camp's PA system, hosted by Boomer Holder. These small victories boosted morale and information flow, indirectly facilitating escape planning. The Great Escape at Stalag Luft 3 in March 1944 served as both a benchmark and a source of shared techniques like tunnel construction and soil dispersal. The use of penguins, prisoners who dispersed excavated soil in their trousers, was a method adapted at OFLAG 64. Lieutenant Sid Waldman, nicknamed Mouse for his diminutive size, was particularly skilled at hiding soil in the roof space. Escape attempts continued. The barrack block design proved advantageous. The concrete bases of unused block stoves offered a viable, albeit difficult, method for tunnel initiation. A homemade compass acquired from British POWs at Rottenburg and high-energy escape cake, similar to the earlier fudge and goo, were essential tools. Jack Van Vliet, the serial escape, developed Van Vliet Escape, Mark II, a plan to break out from the cooler, the camp's solitary confinement cell. His ingenious plan relied on a critical German oversight, the failure to double-lock his cell door. He even left a congratulatory note in the item's sports section. Good show, VV. The cooler break was prioritized over a gate escape by Boomer Holder and George Durgin, who had identified a bent metal strut in a violently opened inner gate that created a gap through which a man might squeeze. However, the timing and weather made the cooler a more viable option. The risks were immense. In October, 2 American lieutenants, Attain and Higgins, were caught during an escape attempt and sentenced to 6 weeks at Hohenzollernhauser prison by the Gestapo, far exceeding the 30 days of solitary confinement allowed by the Geneva Convention. Colonel Drake, however, forcefully defended their rights, threatening to involve the protecting power, the Swiss government. His intervention mitigated the sentence, demonstrating the crucial role of leadership and international agreements. This period, while showcasing ingenuity, also marked a dark turn. The Great Escape from Stalag Luft 3 in March 1944, resulting in the execution of 50 Allied airmen by the Gestapo, fundamentally shifted German policy. No Americans participated in the breakout itself, having been removed from the North Compound beforehand. This fact, often overlooked by popular narratives, dispels a common misconception. The executions, combined with a subsequent assassination attempt on Hitler, galvanized the Gestapo and SS. German propaganda intensified, labeling Allied aircrews as terror flyers, leading to increased mob violence against downed airmen. The desperate war effort prompted the Gestapo's overt interference in pro-Atomcamp administration, prioritizing retribution over protocol. Posters, distributed in English, appeared across camps. Their stark message, the escape from prison camps is no longer a game. They advised that all police and military have been given the most stressed orders to shoot on sight all suspected persons. The message was chillingly clear. Escape was now exceptionally perilous. At OFLAG 64, Assistant Adjutant 2nd Lieutenant James Jimmy Schmitz objected to these posters, considering them offensive to American officers for accusing the U.S. government of gangster warfare. He and Lieutenant Colonel William H. Schaefer were charged with obstructing the functions of the German Reich. Though later acquitted in a German civilian court, Schaefer was transferred to OFLAG 4C, the infamous Colditz Castle. The psychological toll on prisoners increased significantly. Depression, known as Kriegeitis, became prevalent at OFLAG 64, with instances of suicide attempts. Red Cross supply lines were disrupted. causing POWs to lose an average of £9 during a 6-week period. The Mauthausen executions in September 1944 revealed the SS's willingness to kill POWs under fabricated pretexts. 46 British and Dutch prisoners and 1 American, identified as Special Operations Executive Agents, were executed, forced down the steps of death and shot while attempting to escape. Later, 18 American OSS agents, British SOA agents, and correspondent Joe Mortal were murdered with concealed bullets to the back of the head. This solidified the lethal danger for all. German countermeasures intensified. Hauptmann Zimmermann diligently drilled 10-foot holes outside the camp perimeter, setting off explosive charges to collapse suspected tunnels. Yet, ingenuity persisted. The Corrie Tunnel at Offlag 64 featured an air conditioning system managed by 2nd Lieutenant Louis W. Otterbein, using bellows and airlines fashioned from Klim milk cans. Otterbein even devised a suction device to combat flooding. Other escape routes were sought. The Offlag 64 Escape Committee contacted Stefania Maludzinska and Mrs. Lucia Kardziuske to facilitate an escape to Sweden via a boat from the Baltic port of Heistenest. But the risks were immense. Stefania was arrested for consorting with the enemy and sentenced to 12 months at Hohensalza. Her mother was also arrested and died in prison. Major Jerry Sage, a covert operative for the Office of Strategic Services, codenamed Dagger, captured during a Tunisia mission in 1943, exemplified the relentless will to escape. Colonel Paul R. Good, the oldest American in camp, endured a mock execution by an SS firing squad, his hair turning white and his body shedding 30 pounds. Such acts of brutality, combined with the Gestapo raids in November 1944 confiscating best combat uniforms for German special forces, underscored the dominance of the SS and the desperate, lethal gamble that escape had become. The Eastern Front was collapsing. The Soviet Red Army was advancing rapidly, forcing a desperate German regime to resort to draconian measures against Allied POWs. At Schubin, nearly 1,600 American prisoners now overwhelmed the camp's capacity. The creation of the sub-camp Offlag 64Z at Schocken was a desperate attempt to manage the influx. The Gestapo are on the prowl, a chilling warning. Inside the small, unheated washroom off the Little Theatre, Frank Diggs and his editorial team were meeting. Among them, Lieutenant Leo W. Fischer, a burned veteran with compound leg fractures from Tunisia, Ober Schneider, and a ferret corporal, the Weasel, led the Gestapo raid. A stash of chocolate and cigarettes exceeding daily allowances was confiscated. Diggs, in a defiant gesture, ground out his cigarette under his heel. The Germans' desperation manifested in renewed threats. Lieutenant Colonel Schaefer and Lieutenant Schmitz faced revived charges and death sentences in a Wehrmacht court-martial. George Durgin and others who had defied an order to walk in the street in Posen also received death sentences. Under the Geneva Convention, 3 months' grace for a protecting power appeal was supposed to be granted. But in the final months of the war, such conventions were increasingly ignored. On January 20, 1945, Colonel Good called an urgent meeting. He announced the inevitable evacuation deeper into Germany the very next day. The march was planned to a nearby railhead for transport to Brandenburg. The SS, he warned, might follow the column to prevent escapes. A decision was made. Those who are wounded or too ill to march would remain behind at the hospital. 100 men were now packed into the hospital's rooms and corridors, many suffering from upper respiratory tract infections. Pomgratz, the Wehrmacht counterpart to MO Captain Floyd M. Burgesson, refused to recognize Jewish officer Lieutenant Harry Abraham's appointment, a stark reminder of Nazi ideology's reach. The looming evacuation became a crucible for prisoner ingenuity. Improvised packs fashioned from pillowcases and towels, like Captain Thornton V. Sigler's, became essential. Lieutenant Ted Ellsworth used a mattress cover for a knapsack, packing 7 hoarded cartons of cigarettes as currency. Sleds fashioned from bedboards and bookshelves, including one built by Boomer Holder and George Durgin from the Little Theatre stage, were prepared. Frank Diggs and Lieutenant Nelson Tacey even crafted a Cadillac of sleds, a 6-foot-long Polish sled. Food was scarce. Black bread from Schubin's German bakery, 150 loaves for 30 platoons, was distributed. Red Cross parcels, which had arrived after a 6-week delay, were now confiscated. their cans punctured by guards to prevent stockpiling for escapes. On January 21, 1945, over 1,400 American prisoners assembled on the Oflag 64 appell ground. The temperature was several degrees below freezing. The road, Adolf Hitler Strasse, was 4 inches deep with ice and snow. A human river of misery wound west. German civilians, tens of thousands, a creeping train of wagons, fleeing the Red Army. Second Lieutenant John N. Dimling Jr. observed a bitter German woman blaming the Americans. The German military, already moving over 300,000 Allied POWs west, away from the Russians, was in disarray. Their own guards were demoralized. Some would discard their steel helmets, a symbolic act of resignation. Amidst this chaos, the seeds of the greatest American prisoner of war breakout in history were sown. Jerry Sage, the Cooler King, an OSS man trained in sentry kills, planned to join the Russians. Jack Van Vliet carried photos from Katyn, implicating the Soviets in massacres, a complex truth for any liberator. Diggs and Tacey planned an escape using clothing to impersonate a Pole and a German soldier. Colonel Paul Good, the SAO, would carry a set of bagpipes containing the POW receiver, the bird. The game was on. The forced march began on January 21, 1945. Over 1,400 American officers and enlisted men trudged onto the ice-covered roads of Poland. Colonel Good, the SAO, had made a strategic decision. No escape bids until the march west truly began, to maximize the chances of a widespread break. Behind them, at Oflag 64, the hospital group remained. 78 sick and injured American officers under the charge of Colonel Fred Brake Drury were left in the Schubin hospital. Captain Robert Blatherwick, a U.S. medical officer, tended to them, while Father Stanley Brack, the Catholic chaplain, volunteered to stay. Hauptmann Männer, Oberst Schneider's adjutant, handed the gate keys to Chaplain Brack, urging him to lock the gates and promising Wehrmacht transport for the hospital patients. The transport never came. This created a vacuum, an opportunity. Lieutenant Colonel Tom Riggs, a combative officer, hid in the mess hall ice chest. A quartet of lieutenants, Corey, Fabian, Robinson, and Spud Murphy, hid in an abandoned escape tunnel beneath the kitchen. Even simpler, a Kriegi feigned illness, successfully remaining with the hospital, a testament to the vulnerability of German observation. The march itself was a desperate spectacle. From horizon to horizon, a refugee exodus of tens of thousands of miserable, now homeless German civilians crept west. John Dimling Jr. observed a German guard discard his helmet, a symbolic moment of despair. These were guards made of teenage grenadiers, senior citizens up to 70, and wounded soldiers on soft duty. Their own disarray was evident. As the column reached Exin late in the day, the first successful escapes from the marching column began. Billy Bingham and Captain Bob Kroll slipped away. Major Robert Bob Crandall led a group that hid in a haystack. Boomer Holder and George Dargin, struggling with a homemade sled, ultimately abandoned it, shedding weight for their own bid for freedom. After dark, the column turned off the main road and arrived at the Grockholin estate, the farm buildings of Baron von Rosen. This more complex environment offered more hiding places. In the early hours of the morning, Major John Jack Dobson woke Jerry Sage. Sage, his legs temporarily paralyzed by the cold, struggled to his feet, limping from the barn, hiding in a cellar filled with rutabagas. The formal POW structure was dissolving. Hundreds of individuals and small groups were pursuing their own freedom. Some would aim for Allied lines, others for Moscow, or to disappear into the collapsing German infrastructure. This was the genesis of the greatest POW escape of the war. The chaos of the forced march quickly blurred into the confusion of liberation, or something akin to it. As the column streamed from the Rosen estate, the first Soviet tanks rumbled into Schubin early that day. By 10 a.m., an American-made 3/4-ton reconnaissance car, part of the Lend-Lease program, arrived at Oflag 64. Its presence signaled the tangible arrival of liberating forces. For the escapees, initial encounters with Soviet troops were a mix of relief and alarm. Jerry Sage and Charlie Counds, on their journey from Mogilno to Schubin, witnessed Russian infantry draped in looted Polish bedcovers, one even wearing a toilet seat as a necklace. The Red Army, while liberators, were also often drunken and predatory. At Oflag 64 itself, Soviet soldiers looted the Red Cross parcel store, seizing the precious supplies that had sustained the Americans. Russian troops stole Harry Abraham's greatcoat at gunpoint and stripped boots from corpses. Boomer Holder and George Durgin, with their group in Polonoo and Wursitz, encountered looting Soviets. Captain Bruce Martin was threatened by a drunken Russian officer with a pistol to his temple. This was not the benevolent liberation many had envisioned. The reality was a volatile zone, marked by drunkenness, looting, and a stark disregard for Allied property or well-being. Even as German Luftwaffe Messerschmitt Bf 109S attacked Russian vehicles near Wursitz, demonstrating continued German resistance, the Red Army's own internal issues complicated the landscape. Meanwhile, the march continued. On Tuesday, January 23rd, an SS contingent took control of the POW column at Eichwalde, triggering a new wave of desperate escapes. About 100 men, seeking the advancing Russians, turned back towards Schubin. But under the SS guards, some 1,300 prisoners were now herded towards Germany. The Polish underground, however, provided a crucial lifeline. Billy Bingham and Bob Kroll, among others, found safe passage through its network. They would later recount the vital aid provided by Polish civilians. Crucial intelligence, however, was reaching Moscow. Ernest Gruenberg, Frank Colley, and John Dimling, the Moscow trio, had successfully navigated the chaotic front lines. On February 17th, they arrived in Moscow, providing General Dean, head of the American military mission, with direct intelligence. His debriefing the next day and subsequent meeting with Lieutenant General K.D. Golubev, his Soviet counterpart, crystallized the tensions. Golubev admitted to only 450 American POWs in Red Army hands, while the Polish ambassador estimated 1,000. The NKVD, the Soviet secret police, had orders to intercept and corral all Americans on the loose. Dean's attempts to establish organized recovery and evacuation plans were met with Soviet bureaucracy and a deep-seated desire for control. The liberation was real, but the path home remained fraught with peril. February 11, 1945. At the Yalta Conference, Allied leaders had agreed on the prompt and unrestricted repatriation of former prisoners of war. Yet, General Dean in Moscow faced profound frustration. The restrictive concessions offered by General Golubev for the treatment of RAMP's recovered Allied military personnel were a stark contrast to the Yalta Agreement. The Moscow trio Gruenberg, Colley and Dimling were the first Americans to escape German custody, pass through Russian hands and reach their own government. Dean leveraged their story. He orchestrated a press conference, shining an international spotlight on the plight of American POWs, pressuring the Soviets for greater cooperation. Meanwhile, the human torrent continued. Thousands upon thousands of German civilian refugees jammed the roads. Among them, the Schubin contingent, now some Borso 1470 men, marched deeper into Germany. By February 15, 1,100 of them arrived at Stalag Therb, others at Luckenwald, where they joined 635 others. The remaining 490 men, including Colonel Paul R. Farr, Good, their resolute SA, continued to Oflag 13B at Hammelburg. Hammelburg was already crowded. 1,000 American officers and 4,000 Serbian officers were imprisoned there. It was here, on Sunday, March 25th, that General George Patton received intelligence of the presence of Colonel J. K. Waters, his son-in-law. Patton, known for his audacious command style and his varnished helmet, riding breeches and pearl-handled revolver, took the news personally. At 5 p.m. on March 26th, Patton issued a direct order, commenced the Hammelburg rescue mission. This was Task Force Baum, named for its commander, Captain Abraham Baum. Initially, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commander of Combat Command B, resisted the order. He deemed it too risky, too far behind enemy lines, but Patton, driven by personal loyalty and a belief in aggressive action, was unyielding. Task Force Baum was assembled with speed and urgency. It comprised 10 M4 Sherman medium tanks, 5 M3 light tanks, 3 self-propelled 105 mm guns, an M29C Weasel amphibious tank, 27 half-tracks, and 8 jeeps. 54 vehicles in all, manned by 312 men. Its objective, liberate the POWs, initially estimated at 300, from Olvlag 13B. The mission, born of audacity and desperation, was set against a backdrop of immense risk. Its success hinged on speed, surprise, and the hoped-for disarray of the retreating Germans. At 5 p.m., on March 26, 1945, Task Force Baum assembled near Schweinheim, a German village south of Aschaffenburg. Their route was Reichsstrasse 26, the planned main east-west artery to Hammelburg, but this was no plain sailing. At 8:30 p.m., an artillery barrage hammered Schweinheim. By 11 p.m., the main street remained in German hands. Task Force Baum was bogged down, facing unexpectedly fierce resistance. The Panzer Force, a handheld anti-tank weapon produced in millions, proved brutally effective. It could be used by an untrained operator, outperforming the American bazooka in close-quarter combat. Captain Adrien Tessier, commanding a half-track company with the codename Shit, encountered a German lieutenant in a coal scuttle helmet, leading to a violent confrontation. By midnight, Task Force Baum finally emerged from Schweinheim, but precious time had been lost. As the force pushed on, German intelligence, though initially fragmented, began to consolidate. Hauptmann Walter Eggermann, Reichsführer Himmler special representative, empowered to overrule generals, took command of the Hammelburg area. He ordered Kampfgruppe Greffig, a unit of officer cadets, to intercept Task Force Baum. A critical blow came at Gemünden. The Saal River Bridge was destroyed, severing Task Force Baum's direct route and forcing a time-consuming detour north. Worse, from a destroyed Sherman tank, the Germans recovered an American map detailing Task Force Baum's objective. The element of surprise was gone. Meanwhile, Hauptmann Heinrich Kehel, commander of Danube 1, a unit of brand-new Jagdpanzer 38 Hetzer tank destroyers, 16-ton vehicles armed with 75mm guns from the Skoda factory, made a critical independent decision. Ignoring orders to move to Bergzin, he positioned his Hetzers to ambush Task Force Baum on Reichsstrasse 27, near a clay pit outside Hammelburg station. The Hetzers, still gunmetal grey and uncamouflaged, were set. The Americans, shadowed by a Fieseler Storch reconnaissance, aircraft Dash and annoying Mosquito, continued their advance. They found an unblown bridge over the Schinn River at Bergzin, deemed too small and frail for heavy armour by German engineers, but allowing Task Force Baum's passage. This was a momentary reprieve before the inevitable clash. The trap was sprung. Task Force Baum's final assault on Oflag 13 began around 6 p.m., under the relentless fire of Hauptmann Kehl's Hetzers. The American Shermans, climbing a nearby hill, were hit hard. 2 Shermans, an M3 light tank, 5 half-tracks, and 2 jeeps were left in wreckage. The lead vehicles disabled, the attack stalled. In the midst of the chaos, a critical blow to the German defences occurred. Technical Sergeant Charles Graham, commanding an SPG troop, destroyed a German fuel convoy. This swift action deprived Kehl's Hetzers of essential supplies, severely limiting their sustained combat capability. Yet confusion reigned. As the Americans fought their way into the camp, the initial relief of the POWs turned to stunned disbelief. The mission had been planned to liberate 300 American POWs. Instead, they found 1,500. The numbers were overwhelming, the scale of the task suddenly impossible for Task Force Baum's depleted force. Amidst the melee, Colonel J. Chi, Colonel J. Colonel J. Waters, Patton's son-in-law, emerged from the camp, waving a white flag. He attempted to negotiate a ceasefire. But in the confusion of battle, a German soldier shot him, severely wounding him. The tragedy underscored the desperate, unpredictable nature of the engagement. Serbian adjutant Dragan Josifovich valiantly aided Waters, organizing his care and transport. Though Colonel Paul Good faced an agonizing dilemma. To evacuate all 1,500 American POWs was beyond Task Force Baum's capacity. The mission, intended as a swift surgical strike, had become a quagmire. Major Stiller, an observer from General Patton's HQ, expressed his deep disappointment at the partial and increasingly impossible nature of the mission. With heavy losses sustained, Task Force Baum made the difficult decision to withdraw. Their objective to liberate all American POWs remained unfulfilled. The journey to Hammelburg had been a daring, audacious gamble, driven by a potent mix of personal loyalty and strategic ambition. Its tragic end highlighted the brutal realities of war's final chaotic stages. As Task Force Baum retreated, German local defense units demonstrated unexpected initiative. Lieutenant Bartmeier, a proactive Luftwaffe officer, organized his detachment to confront the American column. He even secured the key to the camp armory, preparing for deeper resistance. Hauptmann Gehrig's cadets prepared a deadly reception. They manned a 20 anti-aircraft gun at the trenches, poised for defense. The American breakout, a tactical and logistical disaster, was characterized by deep miscommunication. The initial roadblock, encountered by Lieutenant Newto's column, forced a critical deviation from their planned route. This exposed them to fierce German defensive positions. Then came the ambush at Holrich, shattering the probe's momentum. The lead Sherman, spearheading the American advance, took a direct hit, erupted in flame and halted. Significant American armored losses mounted rapidly. Lieutenant Nutto himself was captured amidst the chaos. Early on March 28, German reinforcements arrived at Oflag 13th, shifting the balance of forces decisively. The arrival of General Major Hipp and Hauptmann Eggermann at the German command post signified a crucial turning point. Their presence marked a shift from reactive defense to a coordinated aggressive counteroffensive. Around 2:30 a.m. that morning, another ambush unfolded on the road to Hesdorf. Panzerfaust armed cadets struck two more Shermans, further depleting Baum's probe force. Gefreiter, Private Pelzer, a determined German soldier, brought a Panzerfaust to bear. He blasted an American M3 half-track in its most vulnerable spot, the lightly armored rear. The explosion was so fierce that it detonated the loads of the remaining half-tracks in the German convoy. The Panzerfaust, Germany's anti-tank weapon, proved devastating at close range. The climax arrived swiftly with the German assault on Task Force Baum at the Rusenberg farm. This decisively ended the American breakout attempt. Within 3 minutes of commencement, the decisive German assault began. 9 Hetzers and accompanying infantry engaged Task Force Baum. The American column, within those agonizing minutes, no longer existed as a fighting force, yet persistent American belief in German Tiger tanks at Hollich and the Rusenberg is contradicted by records. These were likely misidentified vehicles, or possibly German dissection. It was Hetzers, not Ferdinands or Tigers, that truly decimated Baum's column. Amidst the withdrawal, tragedy compounded for the Americans. A tank driver, blinded by the mayhem, failed to see a wounded GI. The tank rolled over the soldier, and one of its tracks separated his head from his body. Chaos reigned. Earlier, in a fleeting moment of triumph, the coils of barbed wire lying between the two fences had been mashed by the tanks, a forceful breach of the camp. The red, white, and black German military flag had been lowered at the flagpole, and Johnny Waters' Star-Spangled Banner, a homemade American flag smuggled all the way from Schubin, had been sent up in its place. But this liberation was tragically short-lived. In the immediate aftermath, a German soldier in camouflage smock fired on Lieutenant Colonel Waters. The bullet had deflected off bone and, chipping the coccyx, had exited via his left buttock. The failure of the breakout led to the re-establishment of German control over the POW camp. Most American POW who had left the camp were recaptured. Colonel Good, a senior POW leader, later guided approximately 400 prisoners back to captivity. German authorities then initiated a mass evacuation of POWs. The plan was to move them to the neighboring Stalagate B camp. From Hammelburg, 1650 American POWs were transferred to Moosburg, destined for Stalag 7th A, which was overflowing with up to 100,000 Allied POWs, including 30,000 Americans. The perceived failure of the rescue mission by German command, specifically Himmler of the rescue mission by German command. Colonel Richard Hopper, the German commander at Hammelburg, was criticized for a lack of determination. This led to his tragic suicide on April 23rd. Hauptmann Walter Eggermann, who orchestrated the decisive counterattack at the Rusenberg, was promoted for his efforts. German efforts to suppress information about the Task Force Baum operation classified it as top secret. They understood its potential for strategic embarrassment, yet the mission, though a direct failure, had complex and unintended impacts. The chaos and widespread movement caused by the operation inadvertently created opportunities for numerous POW escapes. This included the significant success of the Schubin boys. Sergeant Charles Graham, one of Task Force Baum's own, was the only known member to walk back to American lines independently. Lieutenant Thomas Morton, a determined Kriegi, escaped and was recaptured multiple times, eventually reaching U.S. lines. Jack Hemingway, son of Ernest Hemingway, shared his father's stories during his own transport. He lost 70 pounds in captivity, but later became a noted Idaho conservationist. he tirelessly preserved his father's literary legacy. Colonel Good, during his transport to Moosburg, carried bagpipes containing a primitive Metox receiver, a lifeline for intelligence. This period highlights the persistent resilience of Allied soldiers. General Patton, however, attempted to control the narrative. He presented Task Force Baum as merely a feint. But Abe Baum, the task force commander, wounded and captured, was determined to reach Patton directly. He wanted to report his experience and understand the mission's true purpose. The liberation from German custody offered immediate freedom. But for many, it was only the beginning of a new psychological struggle. Brooks Kleber vividly described the street to his uncle's house appearing as wide as the ocean. This symbolized his profound psychological obstacle. His concern for tethered dogs reflected his own past as a tethered dog. Captain William D. Robbins tried to inform a colonel about his son's death and escape attempt. He was cruelly rebuffed, the colonel viewing capture as a disgrace. Private Journal C, so Private Journal C rebelled to vex. Hill experienced a bitter irony. Welcomed home in a custom uniform, celebrating at the top of the mark, he was then asked to leave. He was 19, underage to legally drink, highlighting a disconnect between his wartime service and civilian restrictions. These dehumanizing conditions of POW captivity, starvation, loss of identity, left deep psychological trauma. But they also fostered a heightened appreciation for freedom. The desperate conditions and the impending Soviet advance spurred the big break from Schubin. This was a collective desire to avoid falling into Soviet hands. The Schubin escape, with over 250 escapees, was by far the single largest recorded Allied POW escape of World War II. It surpassed the scale of the more famous Great Escape. It was a testament to American stubbornness, pluck, and grit, and a common, irrepressible desire to be free. Many former POWs went on to achieve significant post-war success. Jerry Dagger Sage served as a Special Forces colonel until 1972. Gentleman Jim Alger, head of a Flag 64's escape committee, retired as a lieutenant general. Johnny Waters became commandant of cadets at West Point. He later commanded the U.S. Army in the Pacific, also retiring as a lieutenant general. Randolph Boomer Holder owned 2 radio stations, known for his distinctive broadcast opening. Frank Diggs even shipped a horse from the U.S. to a Polish family who had aided his escape. Yet, historical truth could often be suppressed. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Van Vliet was ordered by the general to never speak about what he had seen and heard regarding the Katyn massacre. The subsequent U.S. government line mirrored Soviet denial until the 1990s, a powerful example of challenging official narratives. The town of Schubin, formerly Schubin, now hosts a modern reform school with a scale model of the POW camp. A German printer's granddaughter visited to see the site of her grandparents' wartime business. For some former Kriegis, visiting Schubin and the former camp brought an unexpected peace. Their nightmares ceased. The whole idea of war and prisoner of war camps seemed ridiculous. But the cost of help could be immense. Stefania Maludzinska's commendation from the British government led to her arrest by Poland's communist secret political police. The story of Oflag 64, its diagrams and maps, its cooler for solitary confinement, the cake used in the Asselin tunnel, all point to the persistent human drive for freedom and ingenuity. Paul R. Good, debunking the myth of passive victims, was debriefed by U.S. military intelligence. He was known for his opposition to risky escape attempts. Frank J. Diggs, interrogated by the Gestapo, remained a key figure in escapes from Oflag 64, aided by Polish underground members. From 1943 to 1945, the Abelov 64-item newsletter chronicled these efforts. These diverse experiences, captured in memoirs and journals, including Thornton v. Sigler's World War II POW journal, provide a rich tapestry of resilience. The legacy of these prisoners, the consequences of their captivity, and their unwavering spirit continues to resonate.